There are some terms now a part of our indigenous languages that were coined by the colonizers and cruelly applied for the purposes of denigrating us. Such terms were meant to discourage any transgression of the boundaries that guarded the wealth and upheld the norms that protected colonial society. Regretfully, the historical significance of those terms to the liberation of Caribbean people lie buried beneath the mass of our subsequent social advancements and material accomplishments. But we owe so much to the sacrifice of our ancestors, who bore the stigmas so that we could cross over to the restricted territory. One such term that needs to be fully unearthed is the French word diametre, or its Creole form, Jamette. Talk to anyone who speaks Creole, and their full understanding of Jamette is limited to a description of a sexually promiscuous woman. To be called Jamette was to be denigrated. As a child, I heard the term used frequently. You say you're Jamette. You are a Jamette. Sorti ici, Jamette. Move from here, Jamette. Last fait qu'on yon vieux Jamette. Stop behaving like an old Jamette. Sakwe Jamette kon we damn Jamette as you are. Interestingly, contemporary youth in the Creole-speaking territories hardly seem to use the word Jamette, though. Not like the youth of the 80s, 70s, and earlier. Perhaps it is because the real roots and culture of Jamétry, if I may, which was an anti-colonial response, is no longer an imperative, and its full meaning has disappeared from our consciousness. Do we ever make a distinction between a Jamette and a war? The words ho, Jamette, or ho appear to be synonymous. But was this always the case? It may surprise some to know that once upon a time, there was more to being a Jamette than a ho. A Jamette, it seems to me, was a particular character who embraced a particular cause, a fearless persona who represented the grouses of the underdog, albeit with raucous and scandalous behavior. A Jamette, it seems to me, was not solely given to standing on the street corners at night or during the day waiting for work. Rather, a Jamette penetrated forbidden social circles, transgressed the boundaries of social stratification, throwing the weight of his or her language and culture about to challenge patriarchal power and authority. Given our history, we ought to re-examine the function and thus the interpretation of Jamette. Research suggests that the word Jamette derives from the French concept of diametre. The French colonizers had this line, this diametre, which they drew between those who were respectable and those who were below the line, their line of respectability. This line was marked in the colonial city, as in the case of Trinidad, where the diametre separated the aristocracy of the city of Port of Spain from the blacks, those masqueraders of the Canwilly who resided across the East Dry River. The Jamettes here did not comprise only women, but would have included men, children, all. Jamette referred to the poor blacks jammed on the periphery who were always pushing against lines of bigotry for survival and acceptance. The Jamettes would have comprised various groups of blacks, such as the newly emancipated Creole speakers brought to Trinidad from the French colonies, the free Africans who had been captured off the west coast of Africa and brought to replace the emancipated slaves, and the hundreds of immigrants from Barbados and other British colonies in the Caribbean. There was a dynamic demography of separate and distinct groups of blacks brought together, living in crowded conditions, working hard on the estates for little reward. So when did the word Jamette move from a signification of blacks below the so-called line of respectability to being a label ascribed to promiscuous women? Quite likely this development occurred during the aftermath of the Jamette Carnival of the 19th century in Trinidad. That carnival in which the negs on the periphery formed themselves into bands, crossed the Diametre, and ruptured the prude respectability of the Port of Spain aristocracy. The Jamette carnival bands competed to outdo each other, to shake and shock the status quo. The Jamette Carnival was a moving dynamo of New World black expressive culture, loaded with music, chants, dance, and masquerade, and aimed at the colonial masks of superiority. Figures bore costumes that accentuated and exaggerated the shapes and contours of their privates, exhibiting gross movements of sexual display. While these expressions mocked the respectability of the upper classes, the performances were also highly entertaining. The men cross-dressed to suggest sexual papi show, and the women were vibrant in their seductive play. This is the context out of which emerged the Creole word and concept, Jamette. So the mass of Caribbean people who came from Jamette actually emerged from a lineage of fighters. If you drop the sexual promiscuity, what you have is a spirit that drove you to release your voice, confidently move your body, and cross the Diametre to push for a place of equality and opportunity. And like your great-great-grandmothers, you would say to them, "Ou sa kriye mwen Jamette kon vle, ban mwen lè pou mwen pase."